Okay, and welcome to the Q-SYS Control Deep Dive. My name is Patrick Hine, and I am the moderator. I'm also the Director of Systems Marketing for QSC. With us today, we have a couple of great panelists that are going to take us through a little bit deeper into the Q-SYS Control Platform. With us today, we have Martin Barbour, who is the Product Manager for Installed Systems. We also have Greg Mattson, who's the Product Manager for Q-SYS Control. Now, we're calling this a deep dive because this is a bit of a follow-up to the last webinar that we did. By no means does it mean that you had to have watched the old one, but in the previous Q-SYS Control Introduction webinar, we went over the platform itself and some of the benefits that it has. And in this webinar, we're actually going to be previewing a couple of new features that are going to be released in at ISC. So this is quite an exciting sneak preview for all of you. And so I'm going to quickly bring up the agenda slide so that way you can kind of see the order of operations and where we're going to be going today. So first, we're going to start off with a little bit of a room comparison of a traditional system in a conference room, and then we're going to compare that to what the Q-SYS system looks like in terms of both hardware and in terms of cost analysis. Then we're going to transition to a couple of new features that we're going to be introducing at ISC, like I mentioned earlier, one of which is a couple of new features in the UCI Editor, which is the software that we use to design user control interfaces within our platform. And then we're going to go over the newly revised scripting engine, which has a couple of really new cool programming features that I think you're all going to enjoy. And then we're gonna do a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, there is a Q&A box. Feel free to queue them up. We're going to probably save all of those questions for the end of the presentation, but we're going to log them all and we're going to get to all of the questions. So without further ado, I'm going to make sure that Greg, you're unmuted and ready to go.
I'm here.
All right, I'm going to advance your slide and cue you up. Take it away, Greg.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Patrick. And yeah, as Patrick had mentioned, this is kind of an elaboration on some of the things that we talked about in the previous webinar. And so last time I talked about kind of the simplicity and scalability of our platform, and we talked in some vague terms as far as how the kind of the benefits of the Q-SYS platform over a traditional hardware or dedicated control-based platform. Here we have a couple of slides representing kind of a typical medium-large conference room, 6 to 12 participants. And this is that traditional model. This is what we see typically in the world today. A dedicated control processor, dedicated DSP for mic processing and et cetera, dedicated amplifiers for each space, and in order to get this is kind of using some of the soft codec technology that's being more prevalent nowadays. So in order to simply get your PTZ camera into your soft codec, whatever that platform you prefer, you end up needing a dedicated video to USB bridge, and oftentimes, especially if that's an HDMI PTZ camera, you're kind of having to leverage HDMI extenders. Now, within with our platform, we're able to leverage a number of efficiencies. For one, our core processors are kind of the sweet spot for our core processors is in centralized processing. So a single Core 110 is able to replace or take the place of both control processors and both DSPs. So we're able to consolidate a lot of that dedicated AV hardware and really leverage the standard IT infrastructure that exists in the environment. So as you can see here, we have a USB I/O bridge. Our Q-SYS PTZ IP camera is able to leverage network. It's a streaming camera that is then converted to USB via the core or via the USB I/O bridge to whether you need to use a soft codec on your laptop or one mounted in your AV rack. We still stuck with individual amplifiers for each space. This SPA series amplifiers are small and relatively inexpensive for the application. And then we gave dedicated control surfaces in the form of a Q-SYS touchscreen for each individual space. So as I said, all of this is kind of maximizing use of the existing IT infrastructure, and we're able to greatly reduce the amount of hardware you have. Now, per that, we're able to, with this two-system example, we're actually able to save you about 27% in just the hardware itself. But the other thing, and kind of what we're trying to highlight with today's webinar, with the features that we're going to be showing, we are constantly trying to add programming efficiencies. The fact that we're able to consolidate all of these hardware pieces down into a few devices, it's a lot less time dealing with interconnects, dealing with how signals pass between devices. All these devices are native, and all these devices act as if they belong together. And we're even able to leverage that with some of our third-party control. So with that, we estimate that you should be able to, that your programming time is actually going to be greatly decreased as well, about 30%, quite frankly, because you're not as worried about how these things all interact with each other. Now, that said, I'm going to pass it back to Patrick so he can intro the next section, so we can start getting into some of these new features that we've added to the platform.
Great, thanks, Greg. Next, you're going to hear from Martin Barbour. Like I said, we're going to go through the UCI Editor. For those of you who are familiar with the platform, the UCI Editor has been a part of the platform for a while, but we have some pretty exciting changes. So I'm actually going to switch controls over to Martin, and he's going to take you through this.
So now I'd like to run you through some of the new user control interface design features that we're introducing with the next version of Q-SYS Designer software, and show you how we can use them combined with a simple Q-SYS workflow to create an elegant user interface in hopefully just a few minutes. So since this is not a training, it's more a demonstration of new features, I'm starting off with a pre-built design file that has some of the elements already in place. So I'm going to open up my user interface. You can see it's there. It's already scaled for a TSE7T, and I have a collection of pages already built. So this is our new pages pane, which allows me to very easily manage the different pages on my UCI. It also allows me to manage the different layers on my UCI. So right now, each of my pages has 3 layers, one for controls, a base layer, and some navigation buttons. So I'm going to start off by building a simple navigation section for my UCI. So on the video bridge, I'm going to move this pane to make it easier to work with, and now I have the ability to easily drag and drop between these different elements. So I'm going to take these 3 controls, which become the headers for my navigation buttons, and place them down here. And I'm going to use this very simple mechanism to evenly distribute those between on the horizontal axis. So that becomes my page navigation section. I'm going to do the same thing for my microphone mute, my speaker mute, and volume up and down. So again, just place them roughly where I want them, and then use this feature to simply distribute them on the horizontal plane. I also want to add the date and time to my UI, so I'm going to add this component. I'm going to stretch it out so I can see it. I'm also going to do the same thing with the time. And again, now select both of those, and I can change the font size. I can also make it bold, or in fact change the font to a different font as well if I choose. What I actually want is to have those components have no background, so I'm going to choose no background, and then I will change the fill color to make it black text. So there we go. I'm also now going to add a very simple logo, which is from just a dummy company. That's going to be placed there, and that's going to be my UI. So the final thing missing from this is a very simple text block, which is going to be the name of the page. And so this page is called Video Bridge. And again, I can use the properties to change that to a font size that I want and also the font type that I want. So there we go. So that's actually basically our entire navigation and base layer done. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to copy that to every other page that I have. I'm going to choose the base layer and paste it. If I hold shift, it pastes it exactly where I copied it from. I'm going to do the same thing with the calls page. Again, choose the base layer, paste, hold shift and click, and now it's gone back in place. So now I have 3 pages which all have identical navigation and header and footers. So now what I'm going to do is going to start adding the page specific controls to those layers. I'm going to do this on the controls layer. So for my video bridge, I'm going to add the PTZ controls from my video bridge. So I'm going to take those controls, drag them into my workspace. I'm going to do the same thing for the home and privacy buttons. So again, just roughly place them where I want them. And I'm going to use some tools to manipulate how they look in terms of icons, etc. So they're roughly where I want them. And as I said, I can always tweak this later on. So let's select those objects now, and we will use properties to manipulate them. And I'm going to make those 60 by 60 in their size. I'm going to give them a corner radius of 30, so that actually makes them circle shaped, and give them 5 padding and 0 stroke. So those are my controls. I can also now change the fill type. In fact, what I want to really do is change the icon color. And again, using my new color picker, I can choose an appropriate color for those icons and do the same thing to change the color of the buttons themselves so that they're actually a lot lighter than they currently are. So I'm actually going to be editing the off color. I choose this as my off color. And now what you'll notice is that they have a sort of a gloss appearance to them right now, and they also have a drop shadow. So one of the things we've introduced with this version of software is to take that away and just change it to a very simple flat style. And so that's a little bit more modern. So with that done, I now am going to do the same thing for the home buttons, which I want to place here and here. This is a nice little trick where I can drag and drop and now copy the control style. And so the only thing I need to do now is change the icon. What it did was it copied the color and the scale and the other parameters that I chose for that control and simply applied those to the control I just set up. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to copy and drag and do the control style over here, and then just find that home icon again, which I can do in this list here. So it should be around about here. So with that done, I now have my camera controls all ready to go. I'm also now going to take and build some very simple preset buttons. So again, I'm going to take those controls, I'm going to adjust their size again using properties. I'm going to make them I think 60 by maybe 30. I'm going to change their other properties so that they don't have any margin, padding, corner radius, etc. And I'm also going to make them the same flat type that I recently chose for the other controls. I'm going to give them some text, which of course I'll modify to make sure that they're the appropriate preset numbers. So I can change that, make it preset 2, make that preset 3. And again, I'm going to change our colors. So these are going to be again a light gray color in their off state and slightly lighter again in their on state. So let's change this to be, let's see, this one. So there we go. So we have our simple colors, and we're going to copy and paste this actually, and I'm going to remove the text. And actually I'm going to send these to the back, and you notice that I'm doing all these edits and that's not in the UCI editor. It's actually in my normal workspace, and this is a nice piece of Q-SYS. You don't have to be making your UCI edits in the UCI viewer itself. You can make it anywhere you want and then drag and drop those elements once you've got them adjusted the way you want them to be. So let's take those elements now, drag them down here, and those are our preset buttons. And again, I'm going to use the same function to spread them out evenly. So I'll take this final piece, preset 3, and there we are. So those are our preset buttons. And I can show you what they look like. If I go to emulate mode now, I can cycle through and look at those control types. So let's get back to it. I'm going to add this block, which is going to be where I'm going to have my camera preset, or excuse me, my camera select. So I'm going to do that by taking my camera router. I'm going to take those two buttons, which are our camera selects. I can take those, drag them to the appropriate size. I'm going to take the video bridge, video preview component, which is here, and drag that down. I need to scale this down a little bit and make that fit inside my workspace. So this is going to be a once per second JPEG preview of the camera or the video bridge output. Select those two buttons and change the camera router image buttons to yes. So they'll actually show again a preview image on the buttons rather than just being generic control styles. So that is our video bridge page done. I'm now going to move over and focus on the telephony page. I'm going to open up our soft phone, again illustrating that in fact the soft phone component is already built into Q-SYS. There's no need to build joins or connections to a separate DSP because of course with Q-SYS it's all there already. It's going to follow much the same principle as before in terms of setting up the size, the margins, the pads of these controls to make sure that they're circles. I don't want them to have any padding. I do want them to be flat like the other control types, and I want their off color to be again a light gray. I'm going to change their font size to be I think actually 16 in this case, and I'm going to use some simple tools to line them up here. So I can set them up and very quickly line them up where I want them. And I actually think upon reflection that these buttons are very large, and I think I will give them some margins so that they're not all on top of each other like this. So give that a margin of 5. There we go, that looks a bit better. So I'm going to grab my connect and disconnect buttons, and I'm going to take the same control styles, and what I will do is I will adjust their icons now. So let's change the icon to be the phone button, which is going to be here, and let's take this one to be the hang up button, and again its icon is down here, and we will get rid of the text that the icon is sent to justified. I'm going to give that icon some padding, and then just give them some colors. So again they're off color. Let's choose a green that's not too obtrusive. Same deal with the hang up button. Again, not too obtrusive. So there we go. So hang up and connect. I'm going to take the dial string in the call progress bar so that people can see the current state of the call. And much like before, I'm going to adjust these so that actually their background is effectively transparent. By doing so, I can make it no background, and then I can make the fill color black, which effectively makes sure that these components appear and disappear when they're needed. And again, I'm going to change the text size of that. What I want to do now is add the backspace and the delete buttons, and in fact I've already got those created, but what I want to do is to actually add them onto a new layer. And the reason for doing so is I want to make sure that these controls actually appear and disappear as needed. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to drag these controls onto that layer and place them here. So there is some code running that will make that layer appear and disappear, and we can run through that with Greg a little while later on. I'm also now going to create an area on my UI for very simple contacts and recent calls list. So I'm going to place that on my controls layer, and as we've done before, I'm going to take away the corner radius and make the stroke color a little bit less obvious. And now I'm going to take my contacts and history buttons and place them onto that same controls layer. Actually, what I wanted to achieve here is that the contacts and the history are only visible when they're selected, rather than sharing the same space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use layers to achieve that. So I'm going to create a new layer called contacts, and another new layer called history. And onto those layers, I will drag and drop the appropriate pieces. So my contacts is first. I'm going to drag the contacts element. Now again, this is all built into the platform. This is either a local contacts list, or it could be hooked up to Microsoft Exchange or similar. And the call history again is part of my softphone component. So I'm actually going to lay these over and use the exact same space, but because they're on different layers, what we'll find is that we now have a very simple way to switch between them, contacts or history. And with that done, the last piece now is for me to create a really obvious incoming call alert. So to do that, I'm going to create a new layer, and that layer will be called incoming. I'm going to make it the highest layer in the stack, and I'm going to take this white workspace and I'm going to paste it onto that incoming call layer and simply change its color using the properties. So that color, I want to make it a bit more obvious. I'm going to choose a light blue, and onto that layer I want to copy the call connect and disconnect as well as the call progress controls. So I'm going to copy those controls, move back to my incoming calls page and paste them, and then of course I can move them wherever I want them to be. So the incoming calls and call progress, I'm going to make this actually very large, give it a very big font, and adjust the color to match the contrast of this background. So let's make the font, let's actually make it 16. Let's make the fill color a dark gray, and then I'm going to place my disconnect and connect buttons. Of course, I can spend as much time as I want moving these wherever I want. And then to finish off, I'm going to take this image and place it on the page. This is just a nice image as part of our incoming call. So what I can show you now is that if we do have an incoming call, we get this pop-up page, which is quite nice and easy to use. So with that done, our calls page is complete, and I'm going to move on now to focus on the final page, which is the presentation. And this is a very simple page whereby we can change which video source is being routed to the screens. And here we have one final new trick that we're implementing in our latest version of the software. So the first thing to do is to change the size of these buttons. I'm going to make them 100 by 60. And I'm going to change their types or their styles from gloss to bitmap. And here I now have the ability to change the image or add a graphic to those states. So on and not pressed in this case. Here I have the off image, not pressed. Here we have the pressed and on, and then finally the pressed and off. So with that, I now have some custom buttons which you can spend as much time with your graphics software to build those as you want. And now we have very simple controls that are very intuitive for our end users. So what we've been able to show you in just about 15 minutes or so is a preview of some of the new graphical interface tools that are coming your way with the next version of software, as well as illustrating just how quick and simple it is to use Q-SYS Control to build creative and attractive user interfaces for your customers. It's probably worth pointing out that the version of software that I'm using for today's demonstration is development software. And what that means is that by the time this goes live on the street and you get a chance to see it, things may have changed. Certainly we're looking at improvements whereby you might remember that I created the navigation and header and footer and then copied that layer and pasted it onto each of my individual pages. Well, that will be streamlined whereby it's a much more simple process and you just apply that layer to all of your pages. Just another example, lots of work going into it and lots more still to come.
Great, thank you, Martin. We are now going to show you the scripting engine, and again we have Greg running through a preview of something that we're going to release at ISC. We wanted to make sure that you got the best sense of how it looks prior to the release. So with that, take it away, Greg.
So picking up where Martin left off with his UCI, let's view a couple of examples how this new visual coding tool can be used. So this component is referred to as the controller, and you notice there are two different flavors of it in our control components section, the blocks and text. Now the text version is designed to use raw Lua coding, kind of similar to our scriptable controls. Today we're going to focus on the blocks version of this, and I will just drag one out into my view, and we can pick up from there. Now when I open this, it's looking for you to define a control and a connection. To aid in walking through this quickly, I've gone ahead and created two different control or items on the side that we are going to actually build from. Okay, we're going to start off with our camera selection text. So I'm actually going to overwrite the control script that Martin was using to drive some of his camera 1, camera 2 labels in here, and I'm actually going to rebuild that logic using our block controller. Let me delete this and open up this. So I have gone ahead and named a control, and I have no connections that I really need to concern myself with. I did define some pin styles in the properties for this controller. This enables me to basically pass that text through my script into the custom control, which is the text display for our UCI. Start by deleting my control script, moving this into its place, and we will go and hit edit. Now from this window, this kind of gives you the all the different types of blocks. They're categorized, and you can go through them and see what options there are to play with. Now, because I have an idea of how I'm going to structure this, I know I'm going to start off with the control. I want to make sure that this code, this script, is being run anytime I make a change or the input signal of my camera selector trigger changes. So when this changes, I want to evaluate the input value of camera selector. So I'm going to go to flow control, and I'm going to grab an if block. Now you'll notice when you drag these blocks around, they're designed to fit together, and when I get it near the point where it's going to attach highlights. Now I want to determine if the string input of my camera selector is equal to 1. So I'm going to once again go to my operators field. I'm going to pull out this block, which allows me to determine if something equals something. Also, I have some options for does not equal, less than, greater than, so on and so forth. I want to determine if my camera selector control, if the string input of my camera selector is equal to a string of 1. Okay. Now, if this statement is determined to be true, I want it to set my camera selector string, the output string, to the text of camera 1. So once again, I'm going to go to my controls section because this is related to the control itself, and I'm going to select set control string to blank. I'm going to grab that block. Okay. If this is equal to 1, I want to set camera selector string to, I'm going to grab my string block again, oops, and fill that out so it reads camera 1. Now there is a step missing because right now this determines if camera 1 is selected, but I need to figure out how I'm going to determine if camera 2 is selected. So if you click on this little gear icon on my if block, it enables you to attach an else statement or an else if. And all I have to do is take the else and drop it to the bottom of the if block in the window. And it, as you can see, it adds the else statement to my conditional logic. I'll click the sprocket icon, the gear icon, to clear it. And I'm just going to copy this set of blocks because what I'm going to do is actually very similar. So if it's not equal to 1, if my camera selector input string is not equal to 1, then I know that it's camera 2 because I only have two options, camera 1 or camera 2. So I'm going to copy this block, paste it, attach it here, into my else statement, and change this from camera 1 to camera 2. Now, that's it. That's our whole script. Now, if you are familiar with Lua, or you're learning Lua, or you want to learn Lua, what you can do is that you can actually click on this tab up at the top here that says Lua, and you can see the code that is written related to this. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time going through this, but suffice to say, down here, this is the code that I just built using the controller object. If camera selector equals 1, then set the camera selector string to camera 1, else set the camera selector string to camera 2. Now let's see if this actually works. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my video bridge, and I need to connect up my control pins. So I'm going to take my camera router, connect it to the camera selector input pin, and take the output pin of that and bring it over to my custom controls text display, the ones that are on my UCI. Just size this up a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to enter emulation mode. And fingers crossed, when I hit my selections, there you go. Camera 1, camera 2. The text is changing per my script. Okay, so now we have that working. Let's move on to another example. I'm going to go ahead and exit emulation mode. There we go. And we're going to switch to our calls page, both on the UI and in our design. Now, I've gone ahead and actually already created this page toggle. It's a layer controller. So this is another block controller. And what it's going to do is it's going to replace a script that used to toggle the visibility of 2 layers on our calls page, going between history and contacts. So I'm going to go ahead and hit edit. And much in the same way as we did in the previous example, I'm going to start off by opening up my controls and bringing out the on control change. So anytime page toggle changes, I want to do something. Like I mentioned, we're going to be changing layer visibility, but I need to evaluate something the same way we did in the previous example. So once again, I'm going to go to float control, and I'm going to bring out my if statement. Hit the gear icon, add the else, close that, go to my operators, bring out my blank equals blank, because I once again want to evaluate what's going on. And I am going to say if page toggle equals 1, same way we did it in the last one, so page toggle equals 1, then under System, I can go to my UCI settings, and here I can actually adjust layer visibility. Let me move this around. There we go. So I'll get this a little bit better. So in UCI, so from the drop-down, I'm going to select the appropriate interface, and the way that I designated this one is it is interface 1. On interface 1, page calls, show layer, history immediately. Okay? So that's what I would do. That's the command I would do to show a layer. But coding basics, or best practices, actually would recommend break before make. So what I'm actually going to do is when I hit this, I do want it to trigger the history page, but I'm going to start off by hiding the contacts page. So first I'm going to hide. Then what I can do is I can just once again copy paste this on page, on interface 1, calls, show, history, immediate. So that means it hides the contacts layer and then immediately brings up the history layer. And just to put in a safety net or at least check my work, especially considering, let's say I don't have a touchscreen immediately available in front of me, I can test this using the viewer, but let's say I want something else in there. Under my system folder, I can also do a debug print based off of this. So I'm actually going to go ahead and attach a debug print statement, and I'm going to say when this command executes print history to the debug window, and I'll show you that when we run this in emulation mode. Now, once again, I just need to do on the else statement, I need to do the opposite. So I'm going to say in UCI interface 1 page calls hide history immediately, and in interface 1 page calls show layer contacts immediately. Obviously, I do have some layer transitions, but I'm going to keep it at immediate. And lastly, I'm just going to do the same thing with my debug print and say contacts. Now that we've completed the logic for this section, we need to go back to our calls page, and we need to make sure to connect the control pins. So I'm going to take the output of this control router, take the control pin from that, and bring it over to my page toggle. That way, when I hit these buttons, something's going to happen. Now that I've made that adjustment, let's switch back over to our controller blocks because I want to show you the debug window. Hit F6 to enter emulation mode. And now you can see the debug window. It's popped up. So when I hit any of these buttons, when I hit contacts or history, what we should see is a layer change here, visual layer change, but we're also going to see some debug prints that'll say history and contacts. So I'll click on history. Notice the debug print says history. Click on contacts, it says contacts, and we're getting a visual change. Excellent. Another example working. Okay, now that we have two relatively simple examples under our belt, the last thing I want to do is I want to show you guys a more complex script example utilizing the block controller component. So I'm going to go ahead and exit emulation mode, switch back to my video bridge where, if you remember at the beginning, I dropped in two different block items that I had previously created. The camera selection text, which we already did, and the display controls. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up my display controls and hit edit. Now, just so we can see the all of this a little better, I'm going to go ahead and close my interface. I'll reopen that up in a minute. Now, as you can see, this is a rather dense script, all built using Blockly, and I've attached some comments just so we kind of have an idea about what's going on here. Now, the first portion up at the top, this is an Ethernet control module for display, by the way. First thing I've done here is I am trying to determine, before I enable the control, before the control is usable at all, I'm going to wait for an Ethernet connection. So this thing disables the control until the connection is made. Once that connection is made, I'm going to start a timer. And on that timer, I'm going to set a state. This is a variable inquiring that enables me to, that actually enables the control. And then I'm going to poll the power state of my display. Okay, this is the string per the manufacturer protocol that does that. Now, if the display disconnects, it sets my inquiring variable to false, which actually disables my control. But assuming that that is available, that's high, and we're connected, then the first time I hit it, I will send power off, or power on. Excuse me, this is the power on string, or power off, based off the current state being pulled from the display. So, as I said, this is actually a more complex script. Definitely than our earlier examples, but I wanted to show you that not only is this applicable for simple scripts, but for denser ones as well. And I'm going to wrap this thing up, let's go back to our video bridge page where I have my display controls. I'm going to grab this display control button. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to go ahead and open up my user control interface, interface 1. Snap this down to the bottom one more time. And on my bottom bar, where Martin created some of our earlier routing pages, I'm going to go ahead and add a power state.
So I'm going to pull this button down here. I'm going to use that same trick Martin did earlier. I'm going to drag this over, transfer the control style. I'm going to change the icon from video to power. There it is. And now I have a power button on my touchscreen that will control my display. Last thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and clean up the button alignment here using that distribution trick that Martin showed earlier. And with that, we have a complete project using the new block controller component.
Great. So that concludes the Blockly demonstration. Let's actually go ahead. There was a lot of great conversation that was going on in the chat window. So if you're keyed into the video, I'm just going to open it up for questions. We're going to start with a couple of them that we got in the chat window. Greg or Martin, can you first address where the blocks component was derived from? There was a lot of good discussion, and I wanted to give you a live chance to kind of talk about how that came about.
Yeah, so Greg, would you prefer to take that?
Yeah, I'm more than comfortable taking it. So this blocks concept that we have adopted, this framework, if you will, was actually originally developed by MIT. They released a thing called App Inventor several years ago that generated JavaScript based off of this kind of block dynamic. Later adopted by Google and a number of other platforms. There's a few people out there who are dropping names like Scratch. The interesting thing is, I was also being asked where else you could find this. I mean, this block concept is showing up in a large amount of different programming learning tool sets that are designed to teach children, adults, and everyone in between. So yeah, that was kind of the genesis of this. We wanted to make sure we brought in a tool set that could, a modern tool set that we could leverage to kind of help people segue themselves into Lua coding, or if they choose to, as you saw in the examples I presented, if you choose to just stick with the block controller, you're going to be able to do almost everything that you could do in raw Lua right there. So.
Great question. Quick follow-up to the blocks conversation. There was a question that went out that basically asked the question, can you go the opposite way? Can you take Lua code and then somehow have Q-SYS converted to blocks?
So we do have in the when this feature is released, you will have the ability to convert the block controller component down over to a Lua script, but unfortunately there is no way of bringing it back after you've converted it to Lua.
Great question. There was a question about when we can see some of these features. Obviously, I said that we're previewing it at ISE, but Martin, if you want to talk a little bit about when we think we're going to release these to the public.
That's right. As Patrick said, we will be showing this at ISE early February, and our current target release date for this software version, which includes all of the feature set that you've seen in these demos, plus a lot more, is currently targeted for the end of February. And that's what we're currently working towards.
Great. Obviously, this is going to require a little bit of training. I know Blockly kind of mitigates a lot of that learning curve, but obviously we're QSE and we want to provide good training for all of this. So Greg, if you can talk to a little bit of the timeline of when we think training is going to be ready for this.
Absolutely. So we, along with our other control efforts, we are creating a control programming course right now internally, and we should be, we will be prepared to have that open and available to the public to coincide with the 7.0 release of Designer, where these features come. Additionally, we'll as is the norm for QSC, I expect we will be creating some quick tutorial videos, as well as providing design file examples with some of these code concepts, some of these block concepts that I demonstrated here for you guys today.
Great. You know, there's a little Easter egg buried in this presentation. You might not be aware, but the touchscreen that you're looking at is actually not the TSC 7. Greg, can you actually comment on what we're looking at right now?
Yes, so also being shown off at ISC and expected to release this spring is we're going to be expanding our line of available touchscreen controllers. So currently we have the TSC 47, the 4.7-inch, as well as the TSC 7, but we are actually going to be adding a 5.5-inch touchscreen, Gen 2 touchscreen, an 8-inch touchscreen, as well as an 11.6-inch touchscreen, as I said, this spring. In the slide image you guys see before you, based off of the stand type, I believe that is the 8-inch, as well as its tabletop stand accessory. So these are all going to be wall mount. They're going to ship with as a wall mount touchscreen, but the 8-inch and 11-inch will have optional tabletop stands that you can purchase.
Great. There was a question from Tom about whether we have plans to add themes to existing UCI.
Yeah, I can actually, if Martin, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a lot of talking. So themes, well familiar with the concept of themes. We have a couple of things that we want to do. We want to kind of add the efficiency that themes creates, but we want to keep the flexibility that people who are used to with our platform. So Martin quickly demonstrated a new button skinning feature in his video, the image button style. Where you can custom load whatever image file to a particular button and its various states. Additionally, we are looking into some other features that will get rolled in. Probably not going to see them at ISC, but we might have them available for a technology demo at Infocom Timeline that we're exploring along the lines of style sheets, so that you can kind of rapidly set colors, fonts, all that as kind of that theme type concept for Q-SYS.
And then just a quick follow-up to that bitmap feature that you mentioned, Greg, that's going to be available in the next release. Is that what the plan is?
Correct. The image button style will be available in 7.0.
Great. The next question is from David. Will it be possible to create your own plugins, kind of in the same way that we've got drivers for AMX and Crestron systems?
Yes. So actually, it is possible today to create your own plugins. The one thing I will admit is that the process itself is not very well documented. So to coincide with some of the expansions we're doing on the plugin development side internally, we are working thoroughly towards putting together a document and probably some example code that we can distribute on our website via the self-help portal to kind of help people step by step through developing their own plugins.
Great question. A lot of questions for Greg. Are there optional mud rings for the installed version of the wall mount touchscreens, or are they just supposed to interface with the common North American junction box?
Great question, and I apologize for forgetting to mention it when I was talking about the touchscreens earlier. Yes, all of these wall mount touchscreens are going to ship with mud rings. A mud ring accessory, and they are designed, the 4.7 and the 5.5 are designed to mount in standard single gang wall boxes whether it's North American or European, and the 8-inch and the 11.6-inch will mount in 2-gang wall boxes.
Question here from Mark. I believe that we mentioned in the last webinar, and I believe we mentioned it once in this webinar, about the implementation of HTML5. Do we have an idea of when that's going to be released, or is that planned for 7.0?
So HTML5 is not going to be released with 7.0. Just due to timing. However, we are deep into our development cycle in trying to get that out. The real thing we wanted to do before we pushed the HTML5 features out was make sure that we hit parity with what we currently have in our tool sets. I believe if all goes well, so fingers crossed, you will be able to see the beginnings of our HTML5 stuff at InfoComm this year. Though it might not get rolled into that release.
Great question. Here's the question. We're going to wrap it up. We'll only have time for 1 or 2 more questions, but keep those questions coming in. We'll definitely answer all of them via email. We just want to be respectful of people's time. One last question. Actually, we get this a lot in training. Will there be different fader styles or some sort of gauge? So is there a way to customize those faders?
Absolutely. Actually, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to make it into the 7.0 release, but that I actually saw a quick mock-up of a demonstration of that not too long ago. It's something high on my priority list of getting put in there. We want it same with the button image style was the first step, but you will be able to do similar things with custom fader caps and different meter styles as well.
We're going to end on Martin's question because I saw this a couple times. Are we planning on doing a plugin library at some point?
Great question. And actually, I see an earlier question asking for more plugins for other manufacturers as well. So the plugin development, we have a number of control scripts that we are rapidly as we can going through and trying to convert them into full-fledged plugins. These you're going to see a few more, actually quite a few more in the 7.0 release, and then the time between 7.0 and the next software release, you will see also another increase. Long-term, our plans are to utilize something along the lines of a GitHub repository that hopefully we'll be able to roll into integrating with Designer so that plugin releases won't have to coincide solely with Designer releases. So plugins will be able to be released as they are developed and vetted. This will also aid in versioning control if there's things like a manufacturer changed their API and you need that, we'll be able to roll out changes for that pretty quickly. So the plugin library is something near and dear to my heart, and actually a thing that I'm spending a lot of time trying to make sure that it's handled appropriately in the near term.
So we're right here at the top of the hour. There are a couple more questions that have come in, but I'm going to make sure that they all get answered via email, so have no fear. If you enjoyed the webinar and you want to share this with anybody, we're actually going to be putting this on YouTube, so we'll be sending that link out. So if you want to share that with anybody that's interested, please feel free to do so. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll hopefully see a lot of you at ISE. Take care, guys.